So welcome. This is our fifth class on the six perfections. So we're coming to the end
Recording
of the
in progress.
perfections.
Right. Got it.
Okay, Bill. Anyway,
Hi,
so hi, Patty. Let's go ahead and get started with our prayers as usual. So let me go ahead and share those on the screen, and we'll recite the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha 3 times. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. We'll do the short mandala offering. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. Then finally, refuge in Bodhichitta, as usual, the first time in English and then twice in the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chunyan gipe sonam gi dola penshir sangye drupar shok sangye chodang soki choknam la Jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chunyan gipe sonam gi dola penshir sangye drupar sho. Okay, so the topic for tonight is meditation, concentration. And so we're going to do a little meditation to begin with, as usual. And recall again that the instruction, especially what we're working with tonight and looking at developing our concentration into the perfection of concentration, is to make the mind very stable. So we're doing a stabilizing meditation to begin with, working with the breath, or if you have another object you prefer, you can do that, but trying to keep your awareness there as best as you can. And that's the basic instruction. And then, of course, whenever the mind wanders away, to notice that through the force of our introspection and to restore our awareness of the breath, to maintain our mindfulness of the breath. So let's just, experiment with this for the next few minutes and maybe pay attention to what goes on in your meditation when you're trying to do this. I'm sure all of you have a pretty established meditation practice, but see what the general tendencies are that cause you to let go of the breath and move elsewhere in your mind or whatever. And then we'll talk about that a little later when we get into working with concentration. So let's go ahead and begin with the bell. So now let's set our motivation. And throughout this course, we've been working with our minds, the mind of generosity that is happy to give, that intends to be of benefit to others through giving away what we possess for their welfare. We have the mind of ethics or morality, where we wish to refrain from harming others and rather aim to benefit them. And then we have the mind of patience, where we develop the ability to remain undisturbed in the face of whatever we experience that is challenging or unfavorable. And then, as we discussed last week, the mind of joyous effort, this delight in virtue that becomes a very important factor in moving us further and further on our path. As we enter into the last two perfections tonight and then concluding next week, we see the degree to which our minds can be developed to do even deeper work, not only to be able to sustain all of these various habits of giving and behaving ethically and so on, but to deepen our ability to stabilize our minds, to make our minds very powerful, and then eventually to realize the wisdom of emptiness, the key to unlocking our own welfare, but moreover to becoming a Buddha so we can help others to do the same. So we've been seeing the power of our own minds. And it's within that idea that we generate bodhicitta. In order to develop our minds to the greatest degree, we have to have that aim. We have to have that motivation. We have to hold that thought that we want to become fully developed, completely enlightened. Because in that state, when we've attained that perfection, we then will be able to help others perfectly, with great capability, so much more so than we currently can. So all of this is in your mind right now, that potential, that power. It simply needs to be activated primarily by this motivation of bodhicitta. So hold that thought very deeply right now and throughout tonight, as well as beyond today, throughout this life, and all the way to Buddhahood. Okay, so tonight's topic, concentration, meditation. Those of you who've been attending the Exploring Buddhism pilot, this series is called that module, Exploring Meditation. We've been going into some of the topics that are involved in developing this perfection of concentration, which, as I said, is essentially making the mind very stable. Recall that we have two main types of meditation that are taught in this tradition. One is where we make the mind single pointed, focusing on an object such as the breath or a visualized image, what have you. And then the other one is our analytical meditation, which essentially everything else in the Lam Rim is analytical meditation. It is going in and trying to work with the specific teachings and to develop these various qualities and to understand deeper truths that the Buddha taught. And so essentially we have those two, but we don't ever really completely divorce them from each other. While we might focus more on stabilizing meditation at some times, we really want to use that stable mind as the basis for our analytical meditation. So in these last two perfections, we see the culmination of those two practices. While we use analytical meditation for a lot of topics, the one we're going to look at next week, of course, the wisdom of emptiness, is the most crucial one, because if we don't develop that, we can't become free from samsara ourselves, nor can we attain Buddhahood. But tonight we're looking at the other side of the meditation equation, which is stabilizing meditation. And here we're going to talk a bit about calm abiding. Obviously, I can't go into all the depths of teachings that I did for even the Exploring Buddhism series on Tuesday nights, but I'll at least touch on some of the topics, and you can certainly follow up. I'm sure many of you have read the Lam Rim sections on that in various texts, because this tradition of practicing this form of meditation actually doesn't doesn't even come from Buddhism. It's used in Buddhism to unite it with the wisdom realizing emptiness and so on. But these techniques for developing meditative concentration come from the Vedic traditions, from what Prince Siddhartha himself studied with these great masters in the years after he left the palace and was seeking liberation and what have you, before he attained enlightenment. So all of what we're studying and looking at tonight is really a Buddhist reflection or a Buddhist packaging of what was taught in these various other traditions. And even what I've been going through on Tuesday nights, the one this week in particular, looking at developing these deeper states of meditative awareness, are also used by non-Buddhists. So this isn't something that is particularly Buddhist, but once more, what makes it into a Buddhist practice is our motivation, our orientation in terms of what we're trying to accomplish. So let's go ahead and get started. As before, I will pass along a little handout. I don't need to maybe go to that tonight so much, because I once more have put most of this into our slideshow for tonight. So let's go forward with that. Recall that these perfections are set out in terms of them becoming increasingly more difficult. So we're getting into the deep water here with concentration and wisdom. Obviously, to develop what we're talking about tonight in terms of a very stable, single-pointed mind takes a lot of effort. And hence why we looked at effort previous to this, is because once you have a surpassing practice of joyous effort, then concentration should actually come very easily. It's just a matter of creating the time for it. If you have the energy for it, then you should be able to accomplish it pretty quickly. So tonight, the topics we're going to look at, the first four, maybe more than the others, even the fifth one to some degree. But the last one, I'm not going to have time to touch on very much, and that's okay. I do have some slides I've included in here for when I've taught this previously at Tupta Norbuling last year or earlier this year even, I think. Can't remember, time goes by so quickly. But anyway, I will give you a little instruction about that one at the end. First, we're going to look at the definition of concentration. So some opening comments from Lama Zopa's wonderful book on the six perfections. He says single-pointed concentration, which is samadhi in Sanskrit, or Tingye Zen. Actually, I think it should be Tingye. Anyway, it's kind of that NG sound that's like at the end of sing, the word sing. Tingye Zen in Tibetan refers to the deep meditative absorption, free from discursive thought. And there are two types of meditation, as he points out, what I just spoke to, single-pointed or fixed meditation. I often call it stabilizing, and analytical meditation. Except for single-pointed meditation, all the other meditations we do within the Lam Rim, meditations on our precious human rebirth, bodhicitta, and so forth, are analytical, where we analyze the subject through logic and scriptural sources. Within analytical meditation, however, there should also be single-pointed meditation. For instance, say we are meditating on the perfect human rebirth, and at the end of the analysis, thought strongly arises of how incredibly precious this life is. Of course, that's the aim of that meditation, is to get you to a place where you think, I'm so rich with the opportunity that I possess in this life right now, that you then feel the urge, of course, to use it meaningfully. If that happens, when we get to that point, we should place our mind on that feeling as long as we can. Holding the mind on that experience means that the next time we meditate on that subject, it will be stronger, and there will be a greater possibility of actually attaining a realization. So he's kind of pointing out again how these two meditation techniques work together, and kind of giving the advice before I go into it in much more detail. But it was just mainly to point out the idea that they are both central to achieving realizations on the Buddhist path. We can't just do the analytical meditation. We need it to be stable. To avert and then destroy our delusions, we need to study what the Buddha taught about them. Analytical and fixed meditations together give us the power and focus to really investigate, as well as the understanding to take our analysis to its most profound level. So these again are for concentration, but it's also even giving some foreshadowing of what we do in next week's class around the perfection of wisdom, the final analytical meditation that really needs to be accomplished of realizing emptiness. There is no need for faith or anything else at all, Rinpoche says. It is pure rational analysis. And yet, used in the right way, it can lead us all the way to enlightenment. This is unbelievable. This is mind-blowing, Rinpoche says. So, whoops, let's go into a more classic way of approaching it from Geshe Loden, and to get back to the definition. How do we describe this? Concentration, like most of what we looked at already in this course, is a mental factor that is patient and that is capable of abiding one-pointedly on an object of virtue without distraction. This ability to kind of stay single-pointedly on that object is what we're talking about with this mental factor. When concentration, of course, is motivated by bodhicitta, he says, it becomes a perfection of concentration. So we've seen this for all of them, is that we have these practices again, and we even have this factor of concentration that we need to do various things in our lives, to stay single-pointedly focused on what we're doing when we're driving, for example. And when we see accidents often happen when we don't have that focus, when we lose that focus. So the idea here is that these are minds that we all have, but when we unite them with bodhicitta motivation, that's what makes them into a perfection, makes them the cause for our eventual perfect state of Buddhahood. So continuing on with that, from Geshe Rabten, his book on the mental factors, he says, concentration exists to some degree in the minds of us all. At present, this faculty may be undeveloped and only able to remain on one object for a very limited duration. Right? Alan Wallace in his book, The Attention Revolution, he says that we're all dealing with attention deficit disorder. It's just a matter of degrees. Some people get diagnosed with ADD or ADHD or whatever, but we all have this lack of an ability to stay concentrated and to be attentive to a single object for a longer period of time. But with continuous effort and practice, its ability to dwell one-pointedly upon a single object can be developed until in a state of total mental quiescence or calm abiding, as it's often referred to. Again, there's different translations of that: mental quiescence, calm abiding, serenity. Anyway, with that state, one may remain for days concentrating on a particular object, which seems so outrageous, right? Because we have these incredibly, monkey minds that are just jumping from one topic to the next and unable to stay put. But it's just a matter of training, just a matter of continuing to do the work and deepen the work. So again, this is what we're going to go into tonight. And I'm going to try to keep, even though we will get into some more technical teachings, I'm going to try to keep everything extremely practical, because I've been calling this course Transcending Our Limitations, which means to keep moving beyond, push the envelope, as they say, to keep trying to accumulate better skills around each of these 6 perfections. So I want to be focused mostly on that. In the Exploring Buddhism courses, where I've been going into perhaps too much detail, but the detail that people might need if they're going to study these topics a little more seriously. Geshe Rabten then says concentration is also an important factor in the heightening of intelligence. When we are taking a photograph, the steadier we hold the camera, the sharper will be the picture, right? If you're jiggling it and moving it, well, then the picture ends up being blurry. Similarly, the firmer and more intense our concentration becomes, the sharper and more acute becomes our intelligence. So this is a good, more modern day analogy. The analogy that comes from Tsongkhapa, I think, in Lam Rim, which of course at that time they didn't have cameras. That was back in the late 1300s, early 1400s, is one of, if you were in a dark cave and you were trying to see a painting on the wall of the cave, and say you had a candle, a butter lamp, or whatever they had in Tibet that was, the source of light, so you could see all of that. If you have it not being held steady, or a lot of wind that is, making it not so kind of fixed, then you wouldn't get a good view at the painting on the wall at all. You wouldn't be able to discern any of the detail. But if it's fixed and stable and giving that light and giving very powerful light, well, then we can see it all. We can, immediately have all that detail and its richness appear to us. So it's the same type of analogy. We need both factors. We need a mind that's very stable and a mind that's then able, on the basis of that stability, to look at things very closely, to be able to discern the nature of reality. Okay. Excuse me, my throat's a little dry tonight for some reason, and I didn't bring any water in here with me, but we'll see how well I do. Okay, and this is from Geshe Sopa's book on the Lam Rim. I'm sorry I'm giving you so many slides as a preliminary to this, but I think there's a few things in here that are worth talking about. He says, an uncontrollable mind that is scattered, going here and there, cannot serve as a foundation for the wisdom that uproots the afflictions. When you properly employ the techniques for developing shamatha, we saw samadhi earlier. Samadhi is the basic word for meditative stabilization or concentration. Shamatha is calm abiding. It's also called shine in the Tibetan. When you develop the techniques for that, taught in the Lam Rim Chenmo, or any Lam Rim text, your mind can achieve great stability. Once your mind is trained to concentrate, it can serve as the basis for developing vipassana, special insight. This is the heightened form of our analytical meditation that we're going to talk about next week. All of the mental afflictions are rooted in ignorance, which is the opposite of insight. We know this, right? That ignorance is the root problem that keeps us from becoming liberated, keeps us from becoming enlightened. It's the cause of all suffering that exists, all the dissatisfaction. By removing ignorance from the root with wisdom, you can completely and permanently remove the mental afflictions. When all of those are removed, you will have achieved liberation. So the one other thing I want to touch on, that was just to give a little bit more, again, combining the two types of meditation, analytical, which culminates in vipassana, which we'll talk about next week, and then shamatha, which is the calm abiding. The other thing I wanted to share, this is just a single verse. Remember, for each of these, I've been pointing out how these are all simply practices of the mind, and there's a necessity then to work on our minds. And this is very obvious with concentration meditation, right? So this is from Shantideva's 5th chapter. He says, the knower of reality taught that even if recitation and hardships are practiced for long periods of time, they will be meaningless if the mind is distracted elsewhere. So how we make the mind very, very powerful is through the force of having deep meditative concentration. I've also heard an analogy of, like, when you're holding a magnifying glass in the sun and trying to get kindling to light, for example. If you don't hold it steady, if there isn't kind of a steady, very focused aim to what we're doing, then you don't have the ability to light that kindling. So essentially, any of these analogies that point to the fact that without that stability, our minds are kind of all over the place. We can see this right now in our own minds, I imagine, for most of us, unless you've developed calm abiding. And if you have, I prostrate to you, but I don't have that mind yet. And we see how especially it affects us during our day, because we get pulled here and there. Suddenly, this is kind of taking our attention, and it maybe lives in our minds for half the day, and then something else pulls us over there, and then it lives in our minds for a while. And we don't have minds that can, stay focused on what it is we're trying to do, to try to keep our bodhicitta motivation, for example, try to keep our awareness of trying to avoid falling prey to the afflictions. In all of these things, we need a more powerful mind in order to overcome them. And of course, when we develop even deeper meditation, we can use it as a support to completely uproot the afflictions. But all of our actions are going to be really weak unless we have that mind that's undistracted. That's what we're going to, again, go into in a little more detail. So that was a conclusion to a definition, description, various things. Let's look at the types of concentration. These are going to be on the handout that you'll get. Concentration in this presentation can be divided according to its nature, its direction, and its function. So I'll try to go through this in as brief a way as possible, because it's a lot of verbiage, but it is important to understand that we have different ways that our concentration can be approached. In terms of the nature, we have those that are mundane and those that are supramundane. Because again, people can develop these concentrations without having an aim for liberation or enlightenment. The mundane concentrations are those that are motivated, as it says here, by the wish for attainments within cyclic existence. Even just to have the peace of mind that comes when you've developed some measure of concentration, which is pretty profound, they say. We've even experienced it perhaps in each of us in our own meditation, when we've had those moments where we've gotten very deeply into what we are doing and watching the breath or on a particular object. And you feel a serenity, a peace that is just a taste of what you can develop. And that's a wonderful result to get out of our meditation. But if those concentrations are only done for that, they haven't actually accomplished the real goal of meditation, at least in Buddhist practice. And that's where we have the other division, which is supramundane, supra meaning to be above and beyond the mundane, the worldly. And of course, there is where we have the motivation to achieve liberation and enlightenment. Those two more permanent, eternal goals that we can actually attain. And when we do our concentration motivated by that, and it develops into the wisdom that realizes emptiness, then we can call those again supramundane concentrations. The second is the direction. What is it directed towards? We can have some concentrations that are directed towards simply attaining calm abiding, which is mainly what we're going to talk about tonight. But concentrations are also directed towards attaining special insight, that again, very analytical mind. So again, the concentration is referring to the overall meditative stabilization. Some of them are used as a way to attain special insight. And then, of course, we have the third, which is the combination of the two. I've been using this term frequently in the other course, but it's the union of calm abiding and special insight. This is the goal, actually, in Buddhist practice. We might have sometimes where we're focused mostly on calm abiding, sometimes on special insight, but we have to bring those two together. As I said earlier, they aren't divorced from each other. They actually support each other, and especially calm abiding supporting special insight, because without calm abiding, we can't have a fully qualified special insight. So once more, just pointing out in terms of the direction can be towards mostly stabilizing or mostly analytical, or both of them together. The three directions are essential components for the practice of the path to enlightenment. Without the attainment of the stable mind of calm abiding, it is not possible to gain realizations. And more importantly, calm abiding serves as the basis for generating special insight. These are on your handout that you'll get as well. Without the attainment of special insight, it is not possible to generate the force of wisdom realizing emptiness that will purify all the obscurations. Again, what we'll talk about next week. But without attaining the third of those directions of our meditation, our concentration, without attaining the union of calm abiding and special insight, it's not possible to completely eliminate the delusions from the root and attain liberation or enlightenment. So again, that was just a little description to go along with what I just covered. The third way that we can divide up concentration is according to its function. What is the function being served by developing that concentration? The first is concentrations that provide mental and physical bliss. And in fact, all of them provide that. So that's any deep concentration will provide that. Calm abiding and above, all of those provide that. Concentrations that engender special qualities, such as having the clairvoyances, and then concentrations that benefit others, where we use our mind of concentration to help us know exactly how to help other beings. This again is part of our bodhisattva practice of developing concentration. So some real quick descriptions of each of those three. Concentrations that provide mental and physical bliss. As I said, they include all actual concentrations, since they all engender those types of bliss that are experienced in this life. So again, here, we're not talking about just concentration as a mental factor. We're talking about something that is a fully qualified concentration where one is able to abide single-pointedly on an object as long as we wish. So it would be our minds of calm abiding and above, any deeper states of concentration beyond that. And they all have that type of bliss. The first type of meditative stabilization is mundane. It focuses on, why did I put this in here? Let me go forward. I don't know that I need to do that. Yeah, I think I meant to kind of get rid of those. Let's go ahead and go on to the second type, concentrations that engender special qualities. These are those that develop such qualities as the various forms of clairvoyance, the realization of bodhicitta, and so forth. So again, we do have the ability, and what is it doing here? Okay, here we go. Let's just go forward to the third one. Let me take it off screen for just a moment, though. It is kind of interesting. They say that when you develop these deep states of concentration, that they can actually act as a basis for having these clairvoyances, these ways of being able to know things that would normally not be accessible to our minds. One of the important clairvoyances is to know past lives. If you think about if you had the ability to know exactly what all transpired in your past lives. I mean, that would be pretty revolutionary in terms of awakening you to what all, where you're at with your own spiritual development, what sorts of things that played a role in terms of coming into the Dharma with this existence, and the things that you've done, the karma that you have. All of that would be really quite revolutionary. Plus, you would have no doubts about rebirth, right? We all still have that kind of maybe part of our mind that isn't quite convinced that there is something, such as being reborn in various states and what have you. But if we had the ability to know all of our past lives, it would be pretty amazing. And then, of course, there's ways that we also might know others' minds, the clairvoyance that knows what's going on in others' minds. That would be really useful at times if we're trying to benefit those beings, to be able to know how we might do that. So bodhisattvas obviously develop these clairvoyances with the ability to benefit others. And sometimes we do have concentrations we develop with that aim in mind, that we want to, again, develop these special qualities. Then we have the final one that is mostly about benefiting others, and this is to use our powers to accomplish the 11 activities that benefit other living beings. We've seen these 11 before. We saw them last week in terms of one of our types of joyous effort was about benefiting others through these 11 ways. But it was also the list that started in the second perfection, the perfection of ethics, when we saw the various categories of beings that we should ideally be trying to help. And these are, again, I won't go through the entire list, but we can see it's pretty much covering everybody. Those on the right path, those on the wrong path. Well, that's a dichotomy. You have people on the right path or on the wrong path. They're one or the other. But we want to be helping all sentient beings in terms of where they're at and how we might increase the benefit to them through being attentive to what they need through the force of our concentration. That's the idea behind it. So again, I kept these in here, and maybe I'll leave them in your slides, but I don't know that I need to read all of that since I've already talked about those 3 types. Okay, so that covers our types of concentration. So you get an idea that concentration can have a variety of functions, different ways that it's utilized. Now, we're going to mostly focus on calm abiding as the main topic for the remainder of tonight. Calm abiding, again, is this state that can be developed by every one of us. And in fact, all the teachers I've had that taught me on this subject said we've all attained these states of calm abiding and even the deeper levels of concentration after that in many lifetimes. We only did them with that mundane purpose, right? That was set out earlier. If all that we do is to develop our minds to that degree so we have greater peace in that life and experience some temporary freedom from the afflictions, which does happen when you attain those states, well, it doesn't do anything then, right? It's gone when we're gone. We might have some residual karma that carries over into our future lives, but we really don't take advantage of the ability to develop our minds completely and then do something with it. If we don't do that extra bit with it to achieve realizations, to realize bodhicitta, to realize emptiness, and so on, well, then essentially we're kind of shortchanging ourselves, and that's what my teachers have said that we've all done, thousands of times, millions of times perhaps, continued to just use meditation as a panacea for what we're experiencing in the moment, but not really used it to remove the deeper root of our suffering. So it is important that we recognize that's the important thing to do. And to develop that, we have to develop calm abiding. Calm abiding is not an end in itself. It is a means to be able to go into what we're going to talk about next week, to unite that with special insight into emptiness so we can then be free of our own afflictive obstructions and eventually our obstructions to Buddhahood, to omniscience. Okay, so one of the first topics that we come across in the traditional, Lamrim presentations is on the 6 essential causes for achieving calm abiding. And I like to include them, and I wanted to include them in tonight because there are a number of these, as I've pointed out and going through it in the Exploring Meditation module on Tuesdays, that are some things we can start working on right now. The ideal way to develop calm abiding is in retreat. But if we, do what we do now, then we can be more productive when we end up in retreat. In fact, Rinpoche says here, without spending time in retreat, the mind is like muddy water. But within a retreat, being alone and without distractions, the mind can become like a calm, crystal clear lake. There is the clarity you need to help see yourself more clearly, to see your own Buddha nature. To realize the ultimate nature of things, their emptiness, you need a deep understanding conjoined with a fully concentrated mind, the union of calm abiding and special insight. There's no other way to be free from samsara. To do that outside of retreat is almost impossible. Without the right conditions, it will take a long time to gain the realization of calm abiding. This is from Geshe Lodin. He says, as Atisha said in his Lamp on the Path to Enlightenment, if the conditions for calm abiding are deficient, though meditating with great effort even for 1,000 years, you will not achieve concentration. So we're going to go into these. Again, Alan Wallace, even in his book, I've pointed this out in other courses, he says in The Attention Revolution that it's only possible to get to maybe like the third of the 9 levels that approach calm abiding, that are kind of the pathway to getting calm abiding outside of retreat. In retreat, you can go much further. Once you get to like the 4th level, it is essential that you be in retreat in order to take it to that depth. And that's because, again, in our everyday life, the mind just can't be as focused as what we would like it to be. If we're in a genuine retreat that is dedicated to developing calm abiding, where we are practicing meditative stabilization a good portion of our day, then it's possible to achieve it. But we, again, need these ideal conditions. The ideal conditions are what we'd be looking for in terms of a retreat. But as I just pointed out, some of these we can begin to practice now. And then when we end up in a proper retreat setting that physically supports our doing that type of work, we'll actually be able to accomplish it quite quickly. But without those conditions, we can practice all we want, as Atisha says, even for 1,000 years, and not attain that state. So the very first of these is dwelling in a favorable environment. And it's an environment having 5 conditions: a place where necessities such as food, water, and clothing are easily obtained. You don't want to be someplace where you have to be even yourself personally involved in trying to procure things and what have you. It won't be ideal for your practice because, again, you'll be coming out of that retreat space to deal with those. A wholesome and safe place, free from danger and harmful interferences. So you want it to be a place that's calm, where we don't have to have that fear arising because of situations around us. You also want to have a healthy location where you will not be subject to dampness and other conditions that can cause illness, where there's a lot of fresh air and no pollution in the water and what have you, all of these things. So it's very healthy. A place with helpful and conducive companions at hand. This is also very true, especially for people who are wanting that type of support. There are some people who, again, might meditate on their own and maybe have some people support them by bringing food and what have you. But it is good to be in a place where that's like a Dharma center, where there are retreat cabins set up where other people are engaged in the same sort of practice. There are even organized calm abiding retreats that Alan Wallace, for example, who wrote the book I mentioned earlier, organizes through his contemplative research organization. I think that's the name of it anyway. It's out of Santa Barbara, UC Santa Barbara. So again, it's good to have people around you that can support you in your practice. The 5th is a location that's well suited for yogic practice, free from commotion and noise. Sometimes when they do have retreat cabins at, Dharma centers, they set them in places where they'll be away from the normal distraction. If you've ever been to Vajrapani, which has some retreat cabins, they're up above everything. Of course, they do have to often tell people in the lower part to maintain lower volume, to not be so loud in their activities and what have you. But it is important that we have that ideal place, even a place where perhaps teachers, such as our own teachers or other great practitioners, have practiced before, have actually done meditation retreat there. Kind of makes it very powerful when that's happened. So we do see this sometimes with regard to various places that we go to. I was surprised when I went to Kopan Monastery to lead the November Kopan course in 2015. My meditation was so different there. There's just something about that place that when you go into meditation, you just settle really, really easily. And sometimes, again, you can become sensitive to that when you go to different places. Some places are really ideal for some people, some for other people. So Anyway, let's get back into the slides and go on to the second of the 6 essential causes. These are the ones that we can work on now. The first one is really kind of the ideal place, having that ideal setting. 2 and 3 kind of work in tandem. We want to have few wants, meaning that we don't want what we don't possess. So we are, in the end, then also content with what we do possess. Kind of live in a state of genuine contentment and not having that craving mind that's continually looking for something else. Oh, I want that. Oh, I need that, what have you. Hopefully we've begun to address it in our own Buddhist practice, but these are an important thing to address because otherwise a lot of the time on the cushion is going to be preoccupied with that excitement we're going to look at earlier, which is the continual looking for something more, something that is coming from a place of dissatisfaction, being very excited about objects of attachment. The fourth one, maintaining pure morality. Well, hopefully we've all begun to do that. We talked about the perfection of ethics some sessions ago. And essentially, you need to have pure morality in order to engage in deep concentration. Remember that in the middle scope of the Lam-Rim, those teachings in common with the people who are practicing a path to their own liberation, we often talk about the 3 higher trainings there as being the way to attain liberation. And all 3 of them are mirrored in the 6 perfections. The first one is the higher training of morality or ethics. That's the foundation. That's the absolute, ground upon which we can develop concentration. And if you think about it, if you had a mind that was disturbed by all the various behaviors that we talk about in the 10 non-virtues and what have you, it's very hard for the mind to settle when you get on a cushion, right? Because you're caught up in all of that type of energy that's negative karma. So we have to practice morality as a support for concentration, which is the second of the 3 higher trainings. And then on the basis of concentration, we can develop wisdom, which is what we've been talking about also tonight, and we'll go into next week. So we see that all 3 of those are in the 6 perfections. We just added in generosity, patience, and joyous effort. But essentially, the Buddhist path to enlightenment entails the same central trainings as the path to liberation, individual liberation. The analogy that's used there, I was talking about kind of the sharpness of a camera earlier on that quote from Geshe Rabten, holding it very, very, steadily so that we can get a good image. Here, the analogy is used of a person who's trying to chop down a tree with an axe. And so the strength of the person is said to be their morality. It's kind of a little bit different analogy the way it's used here, but essentially the way that you will have strength to be able to eventually chop down the tree and overcome all of our delusions is through having morality, because it's the foundational practice. The second one in terms of concentration is having perfect aim. If you're going to chop down a tree with an axe and you're hitting it in different places every time, you're never going to have the ability to actually, chop down the tree effectively. You're going to instead probably take a much longer time if you can at all. So the aim is a bit similar to what we see in the camera. It's not identical, but having that steadiness to be able to hit the tree in the same place every single time. Now, what is the wisdom, the third higher training? It's the sharpness of the axe. So if we're able to, if you were there with a dull axe, if you didn't have that wisdom, no matter how many times you were able to make it single pointed and to have it be steadily hitting the tree, it's not going to do too much damage to the poor tree. A tree, if you want to completely sever it, you need to have a very sharp blade. And so the sharpness of the axe is the wisdom, the steady aim is the concentration, and the strength of the axe person is the foundation of morality. Okay, so enough on that, but I just wanted to point out that having pure morality is an essential practice, essential cause for being able to develop calm abiding. I might even point out that Rinpoche says we also have to engage in the morality of accumulating virtue, of accumulating merit, because without that meritorious store of virtue, it will be impossible also to develop calm abiding. He even says how some people think all I need to do is get myself in the right place and just focus on my breath or whatever, and I'll get it. If you don't have a good store of merit, it's not going to happen. The fifth is completely giving up the demands of society. Even if we go in our own kind of little retreats like I do every year of two weeks, we want to shut off all that other stuff. This time when I went into retreat in October, I had to spend the first 3 days almost like wrapping up things so they wouldn't be hanging over my head the rest of the time. But it is good to plan that into your retreat time, by the way, if you want some advice on that. If you are a person who's quite busy, maybe have 2 days or so that you can decompress from all of that, kind of let go of all that, finish your emails, shut off all your accounts, whatever that you need to do, so you can then just go into meditation and not worry about all of that. But this is if we are continually being drawn to this and that and writing emails and texting people and doing whatever to manage our business or our social life or personal life, that's not how we're going to develop deeper concentration, because all of those things keep pulling us out of what we're trying to deepen, trying to make our mind much more settled and at peace. So this is an important factor as well. And if we can simplify our lives now so that we don't have quite so much, that's a wonderful thing, to be able to do. Also, number 6, completely abandoning thoughts of desire, all the other sort of afflictive states that also cause us to be disturbed. We can begin to work on that. Alan Wallace actually describes this one a little bit differently. He uses the words dispensing with compulsive thoughts, which is a little bit different, right, than completely abandoning thoughts of desire. He describes it as many of us let compulsive thoughts dominate our minds. These won't stop overnight, but as we engage in shamatha practice, both during and between sessions, it is important to observe the mind's activities and restrain it when it falls into thought patterns that aggravate mental disturbances. So we might pay attention to our own minds now even, and what are the compulsive thoughts that tend to dominate our time on the cushion, where we might have something from our past or something that we tend to think about as an object of attraction. These compulsive thoughts that we just keep ruminating on, keep recycling. These are the things that we're talking about here with this 6th factor. Now, Bhavanka Rinpoche says, when you have fulfilled all the above prerequisites and make effort in your practice, you will take no more than 6 months to achieve mental quiescence, calm abiding. Now, having said that, I think we, always have to take these things and say, well, but this is given that we've come into that situation with a lot of good meditation practice. That's why you can't just like say, okay, I've never meditated before, and now I'm going to go into retreat and achieve calm abiding, even though, I've got good morality and some of these other things are a bit simmered down. Even if you have the most perfect location and the perfect spot in the world, the best cave in the house, you're still going to have difficulties if you haven't done a lot of meditation practice before and studied these things before. That's why some of these aren't really, the essential causes aren't really complete. In fact, you have to have extensive study of all that's involved in developing these 9 mental stages and what have you. And of course, again, doing daily practice. That's why Geshe Sherab often recommends very highly that we do some level of practice every day. Even if it's only 5 minutes, if we are having a really crazy day, we're booked solid, and all we have is maybe 5 minutes in the morning before we start everything. Do your 5 minutes. That's fine. It doesn't have to be, half hour, 2 hours, whatever. But if you can continue to do that's practice, and we'll talk a bit about the timing of that and what have you shortly, that's so important to have that continuity. It really does make a difference. So, all right, let's go on to particulars of meditation a little bit, because if we're going to engage in calm abiding and any of our practice prior to that, we do need to touch on these briefly: posture, time, object. There are generally 7 points in regard to the ideal posture. But, many people might, need to modify those for their own situation. I know I do. I can't sit in full lotus posture, which is how we should ideally have the legs. But if you can do half lotus, or if you can find whatever is comfortable for your body that is a stable position, that's fine. I don't need to go into all 7, but essentially, remember that one of the most important ones is the back. We want to make sure that the back is straight. If you're slouched over, kind of everything, energy all kind of compressed in, this is not a good way to meditate. Again, it might be very relaxing for you because you've had a hard day and you just feel like letting your head fall over and what have you. But relaxation is a part of meditation, but it's not the goal of meditation to relax you. It's to make the mind very sharp and alert, to make the mind very focused and attentive. So again, there are other elements, paying attention to the eyes, to the head being raised at a particular level, and the mouth and the jaw and what have you. I don't need to go into all of that, I think, for most of you, since you've done meditation practice. I will send along to John to get out to everybody via Sarah. Thank you both for helping with that. A handout on the 7-point meditation posture that you can review. But it is important that although we're not physically meditating, we're not meditating with the body, we're embodied beings. And so the body has to be in a proper position to be able to benefit from meditation and to support our meditation. So essentially, the elements of physical posture, we do need to pay some attention to. But as I said, you can modify them slightly depending upon your own situation. One of the questions I frequently get is, do you have to sit on a cushion? Well, you can sit in a chair if that is more comfortable to you. It might be best to move forward in the chair to where you are sitting without the back of the chair behind you, so that you are able to maintain your own uprightness to the back without the back of the chair getting in the way. A lot of chairs, the back doesn't quite make the back straight. Instead, it makes it sort of a little forward or sometimes even backward. Okay, so anyway, that's probably enough about posture. Go back to the slide and finish off that topic. As I said, relaxation of the body within the posture is a key element for good concentration, and this will help to relax the mind as well. In fact, you might even take a look at a book by someone named Will Johnson. I think I said Johnston, and when I was talking about it in the other course, I think it's Johnson. He wrote a book on posture of meditation, and he talks about 3 factors: relaxation. What's the other one? The last one is resilience. But anyway, he talks about these various alignment, relaxation, and resilience as being 3 factors we need to pay attention to with our bodies. Well worth checking out. There's an article even on the internet about those 3 and how he teaches them. Okay, timing. It's good to meditate around the same time every day so that a habit develops. If we're meditating whenever we can, well, if that's how we have to live our lives, well, then that's better than not meditating at all. But we'll get the most benefit if we develop a habit to where we're meditating at, 5 o'clock every morning or 6 o'clock, or if we find there's time in the middle of the day and we always can do it then whatever works for you. It doesn't have to be at a particular time. They do say that meditating in the morning is generally better for most people because they're refreshed from their sleep and they don't yet have all of the busyness of the day they're involved in and what have you. As for the duration of your meditation, the time of that, quality is better than quantity. So shorter sessions with better focus are preferred. This is a mistake a lot of people make, is that they bite off more than they can chew. And they sit down to meditate and they say, oh, I've got to meditate for an hour. And then they are totally off the object for 56 minutes of the hour. And the 4 minutes that they're on the object, it would have been better to just meditate those 4 minutes and stay on the object than to only have 4 minutes of concentration in the course of an hour. I'm kind of exaggerating here perhaps, but that tends to be the case. I remember Pema Chodron in one of her teachings, she said that the first time she sat down to meditate, she remembers hearing the gong, go off. And then all of a sudden she heard the gong go back on again, at the end. However many minutes there was between that, she wasn't meditating. She was just kind of in la la land, wherever. And that tends to be the case. And it's much better, at least particularly initially, to work with much shorter durations of time. Venerable Rabino often recommends just like 5 minutes. Just do 5 minutes, then maybe take 1 minute off and do another 5 minutes where you're definitely trying to keep that concentration, then take another minute off and then do another 5 minutes. It's like a little over 15 minutes that you spend on your cushion. That's great, just as a beginning practice, but even can be even shorter than that, just a single session of 5 minutes if that's all you have time for. It's much better to do those periods where we're maintaining focus as best as we can than to have longer periods where you've just lost the object for a good portion of it. Okay, so that's probably enough on the time to do it as well as the timing of your meditation in terms of the duration. A little quote from Rinpoche: "You might sit long hours in meditation, but if you have a distracted mind, there's no hope of gaining any realization. Your appearance as a meditator is a complete hallucination. You might look like you're really doing a good job because you're sitting in that meditation posture, but the mind is not on the object, it's distracted." Objects of meditation. I'm not going to talk in great detail about this as I did in exploring meditation in regard to objects used to develop concentration. While there may seem to be an element of single pointedness involved in the sense consciousnesses focusing on their objects, such as when we're intently staring at something and what have you, concentration in this sense is developed only in the mental consciousness. Therefore, concentration is cultivated by using internal objects of meditation, not external. So meaning that ideally we shouldn't have objects of the senses being the objects that we're focusing on, such as staring at a Buddha image, and making our meditation about using our eye consciousness to hold that concentration on that object. Although we can call that concentration, it's not what we're talking about developing here. You have to bring the object inside into your mind. Now, the question comes up, and I've answered this in that other course, but what about the breath? I mean, the breath is a tactile sensation. It's an object of our sense consciousness. And if we're focusing on the sensation at the tip of the nose or in the lower abdomen, we are focusing on a sense object. But nonetheless, Alan Wallace points out very clearly that when you do get to a particular level of your progress, and it's actually at that fourth mental abiding or mental state that we'll talk about very briefly at the end of today, it converts automatically. It's a process where suddenly you're focusing on the breath. It becomes an internal object. It appears as like a star or a cluster of pearls or something, all these various images that, depending upon your own predisposition, it'll appear as that. And as soon as it appears as an internal object within your mind's eye, you move to that object. It is said that in order to move further beyond that, it has to become an internal object. For us to develop calm abiding and any states above, we can't do it on the basis of a physical object, something that we are knowing through our senses. Rather, it has to be within our mind's eye, something that we're seeing or experiencing through our mind. You can attain calm abiding on the basis of emptiness. And emptiness, of course, isn't an image. You don't bring an image like a Buddha image to your mind or what have you. But obviously, it's bit more challenging for people to develop calm abiding with those sorts of concepts or ideas. That's why I generally encourage people to work with the breath. And as Alan Wallace says, eventually the breath will become an internal object. Another point on objects: one should initially use antidotes to one's most prevalent afflictions as the focus of meditation. We've talked about these antidotes in a number of teachings that I've done for all of you. We just talked about the antidote to anger, being patience and what have you. But we should ideally try to address those states of mind that are problematic for us. Why? Because we bring those onto the cushion. If we find that we've got that craving mind that's constantly desiring things, if we haven't developed some focus on the antidote to that, which is seeing the unfavorable aspects of those attractive objects, or seeing their impermanence or the disadvantages of those things, then we essentially will continue to be plagued by that mind as we continue to do our meditation. So it's best to remove the coarser afflictions as best as we can through those sorts of thoughts. And then we can do the deeper work of focusing on an internal object, such as, again, the image of a Buddha or what have you. Once those afflictions are subdued, one can use any object, though one should distinguish between ordinary and special objects for meditation. Ordinary would include anything. I mean, you can meditate on essentially anything, but you shouldn't meditate on something that's going to bring up delusion for you, like someone who you're very close to, meditating on their face so that all of your attachment comes up when you're thinking about them in meditation. Or a gun. I mean, you wouldn't want to meditate on a gun as your object of focus, your little visual image of a gun, because a gun is not a very virtuous object in its nature and what it's used for. One of the most special objects, though, for shamatha meditation is the body of the Buddha. This is typically Shakyamuni Buddha, but it can be any Buddha. It can be Tara, it can be Manjushri, whatever Buddha that you want to use. Of course, the main focus of this practice is to cultivate meditative stabilization, but because the perfect body of a Buddha is an extremely virtuous object, you create a tremendous amount of merit by focusing upon it. So they often encourage you to use something like what I'm reaching for here now, which is a little small statue of the Buddha, so that you don't have something that's huge. You don't want to meditate on like a full-size being. It's a lot to hold in your mind's eye, right? A little object like this, you can hold it in your mind's eye pretty easily. They say generally about the size of your thumb, something in that, dimension. It is hard. Alan Wallace does speak to this in his book. And by the way, I recommend that book highly for any of us wanting to pursue developing these deeper states of concentration, calm abiding. He does talk about how, in his experience, Westerners don't have as good a proclivity to using visualized objects as what Tibetans have. Tibetans, of course, with Tantra and all these other things, visualization is a big key part of Tibetan Buddhism. And it is for all of us too, but nonetheless, we don't necessarily have the proper minds due to, again, perhaps all the distraction that we have in our society. Meditating on the breath is the object he often encourages people to use because it is much easier to settle the mind with the breath than it is to create a visual image. And I often speak to that when I teach on meditation, is the fact that it takes a lot of mental energy to create and sustain an internal, image. Whereas if we meditate on the breath is with us all the time. We don't have to create anything, to go, oh, I need to breathe now so I can meditate on it. You're always breathing, so you can meditate on your breath constantly. So it is an important object to use. I know Lama Zopa Rinpoche, I may be saying things that he wouldn't necessarily agree with. He doesn't see where there's a whole lot of merit to meditating on the breath. It's a neutral object. It's not like a meditating on a gun or something that is, really harmful. But nonetheless, if we're doing it with proper motivation, I think, again, it can be really useful if you find that it's much easier for you to work with the breath than it is for you to work with some other object. By all means, that should be the object that you choose to gain this mind of calm abiding. Once you have the mind of calm abiding, you can simply introduce another object and you can develop it very easily on the basis of a new object. You don't have to, go through quite as much stress and strain to do that. So anyway, Alan Wallace says more about that in his book, but the rest of tonight, I really want to focus on what are called the 5 obstacles and the 8 antidotes, because they speak to a lot of what we encounter right now in our practice, not just what will be encountered when we go to develop calm abiding. And then again, I'm going to just touch so briefly on the 9 mental stages and other factors because they're on your chart. And again, they're taught in the Lam Rim, but it's not so easy to go into those without a lot of detail. The very first fault that we have is laziness. You might recall laziness from last week. Laziness was the enemy of our joyous effort. And you'll recall that last week I mentioned that we need aspiration as one of the powers to overcome our effort. Well, what is aspiration rooted in? I mentioned this last week as well, faith. So the very first way that we overcome laziness, which is our tendency to not do our practice for whatever reason, because we put it off, procrastinate, because we are too caught up in mundane worldly activities, or thirdly, because we are somehow believing that we can't attain these states. The very first antidote is to have faith, which means developing some conviction in our own ability to develop calm abiding, as well as the benefits of calm abiding and what it will mean if we are able to develop this degree of concentration. Then, and this can go for any meditation, if we've got some faith in what meditation is about and the power of meditation and a power of our own minds, that's the first step. On the basis of that conviction, that faith, we then have aspiration. Aspiration is the mental factor that causes us to move in a particular direction, to have an aspiration to engage wholeheartedly in meditation. And then, of course, with that aspiration, we put effort into it. Effort is the key thing that really causes our meditation to flourish. And then the final antidote, the one that all 3 of those lead to, is pliancy. Pliancy, remember, is a mental factor. It is a part of our minds when the mind becomes very supple and serviceable, but it also has a physical element. They say when you do finally attain calm abiding, that's the demarcation, is when you have both physical and mental pliancy. And moreover, a bliss has arisen with relation to both of those, really joyful, light state of our minds and our body. So essentially, pliancy is the final way that we're released from any form of laziness, because it is the culmination of all of those months or years of work that lead us to eventually have that state of calm abiding. So that's the goal, is to make our mind incredibly serviceable through our meditation. And once more, we can look at where we're at with our own meditation practice. How serviceable is your own mind and body, for that matter? And when we sit on a cushion, it's kind of hard dealing with the physical nature of this body in its current state. When you attain calm abiding, the body has a lightness to it, like cotton. It's just very soft and doesn't have any of the aches and pains and what have you that we normally uh, uh, deal with in our meditation and become problematic for us. So before you begin to meditate, Geshe Sopa says it's very important to reduce or remove laziness. Laziness has many forms. One type of laziness is not wanting to do a particular practice. Someone may have an interest in it, but laziness takes over and they do not make any effort in their practice. Still others are so enthralled with worldly distractions that they have no strong wish to achieve shamatha, or meditative stabilization. And then, of course, we had the third type of laziness, which was our sense of self-defeatism, thinking we can't possibly achieve these things. Laziness has 4 antidotes: faith, aspiration, perseverance or effort, and mental pliancy. The fourth, mental pliancy, is actually the result of the first 3. When we have that strong faith, we aspire to achieve it, and we then put effort and persevere through day in and day out doing that work. We'll actually attain the state of calm abiding with that mental pliancy, and again, the physical pliancy that's with it. Perfect shamatha is the ability to naturally remain on your meditation object. This is kind of taking us into the next fault and the antidotes to it. So what he's saying here is, again, that when we want to achieve this state where we can, without interruption, abide for as long as we wish with perfect clarity on the object. This is the goal of our practice, right? There are 2 things needed in order to achieve this. First, a method that keeps your mind from getting distracted from its object of focus. And secondly, an accurate way of knowing whether your mind is distracted or lax, or becoming distracted or lax. So essentially what he's talking about here is mindfulness and introspection. These 2 are the antidotes for the next 2 faults. So let's take a look at each of these a little bit before we go into those. The first of these necessary conditions is often referred to as mindfulness, a technique that prevents your mind from forgetting the object of meditation. Whoops. Let me talk about mindfulness just a little bit, because again, it is important to note that the way mindfulness is used, for example, in the Insight Society, Meditation Society, those forms of meditation based in the Theravadan tradition, mindfulness is more about this idea of a quality of mind that we bring to any moment where we can be kind of unconditionally present with what is going on. And that may have an aspect of what we mean by mindfulness, but here it's a quite specific mental factor that is not allowing us to forget the object. It is what holds the object, in a sense. Mindfulness of the breath means holding the awareness on the breath. And of course, then we have concentration, the stabilization that ensues from that, and we don't have any of the distraction. So mindfulness is what allows you to remember the object, to be able to stay with the object of focus that you're working with, be it the breath or the image of a Buddha or what have you. The other factor that we need is introspection. The second is introspection or vigilance, a method to constantly and consistently assess your mental situation. It's a way of knowing whether your mind is getting distracted or dull, tending toward excitement or laxity, the 2 faults that we're going to see coming up a little bit later. They're together in the third one, kind of not seeing those. Anyway, what we need is this introspection. They often compare introspection to being kind of like a spy in the corner of the mind. We need to be checking up to see what's going on with our meditation. I often remind people of this when we just do the short meditation at the beginning of class, right? I'll say, keep your awareness on the breath, and whenever you see that the mind has gotten distracted, then gently guide the mind back to the breath. So essentially, we have this factor of introspection that checks up occasionally, and it's not just used on the cushion. We should be checking up continually about what's going on with our own minds. Do I have a delusion arising? Do I have mistaken ideas, conceptions arising, disturbing thoughts arising? All of this should be part of our daily habit of using our introspection as that sort of spy that checks in occasionally to make sure that we're still on track with what we need to be doing. So Rinpoche even often talks about Bodhichitta mindfulness to try to maintain a mindfulness of our motivation of bodhicitta in regard to whatever we do. Remember, I talked about that last week with joyous effort, how even when we relinquish the task, that one power where we set aside the work so we can replenish our energy, we do that even with bodhicitta motivation. So we need mindfulness definitely as a factor because we need to stay present and not forget what it is that we are doing in our meditation or off the cushion as well. But we also need introspection to check up to make sure that we aren't going astray, that we haven't forgotten the object, haven't forgotten what we're practicing. Okay, so let's take a look then at how those two factors play in terms of the next two faults. The second fault after laziness is forgetting the instruction. By the instruction, we mean the instruction to abide on that object. Well, how do we keep from forgetting? Through the factor of mindfulness, non-forgetfulness, by strengthening that holding to the object and not letting our mind forget it, not letting us lose the object in a sense. So in his Compendium of Knowledge, just to give you a little another citation about mindfulness, Asanga explains mindfulness as follows. What is mindfulness in regard to a familiar object? It has to be something we're familiar with. You can't be mindful and not forget something you never knew in the first place, right? So it has to be a familiar object. Your mind is not forgetful. That's the aspect of that mind. It's not forgetting. It's not losing that object. And it operates without distraction. That's the function of it, is that it allows the mind to not be distracted, because if we're staying with the object, then our mindfulness is there. And then when our introspection comes in, there's no problem. Our introspection sees that the mind's doing just fine. We're with the object, we're with the breath. In short, the function of mindfulness is to control your mind. It ties your mind to your chosen object for as long as you wish. It is naturally free of the two hindrances of excitement and laxity. Right? Because when we have that non-forgetfulness, we don't have things that draw the mind outwards. We'll talk about excitement and laxity shortly. He says this is important, to have that understanding of what mindfulness does. Whoops. How do you practice mindfulness when you concentrate on something? First, you focus your mind on your chosen object, the breath, Buddha image, what have you. Then one aspect of your mind recognizes that it is focused on its desired object, right? You see that the mindfulness is present and you continue to abide in that space of mindfulness. From that point on, there's no more analyzing, examining, or thinking about the object. Your mind just maintains the strength of its attention without distraction. So what happens though when we get distracted, when other factors come in? Well, we have to be sure to identify them. The two main factors that are set out in this instruction about attaining calm abiding are called laxity and excitement, and I'll talk about them in a moment. But when these faults arise, we can have the fault of not seeing them, of just kind of getting caught up with them. Well, what keeps you from missing that? Your introspection. Again, your introspection is the spy that checks. And if it sees that the mind has gotten distracted through either of those, is no longer on the object because of laxity or excitement, then it corrects it. So let's talk about laxity and excitement in a very general way. Laxity is part of the factors that are the inward drawing of the mind. When we're doing meditation, as was pointed out earlier, it's with our mental consciousness. So we are naturally sort of trying to shut off all of our awareness of the outside world. We're going inside, and sometimes the mind gets drawn inward too much, and there becomes a heaviness, a dullness of the mind. Laxity is a subset of that type of energy. And maybe, again, I'm guessing most of you have some experience with that mind of heaviness, dullness, lethargic sort of mind. Might even cause us to fall asleep on our cushion for a moment or so, and then our head jerk back up or what have you. This is the force that when we do begin to move inside, because we do that when we go to sleep generally, that's the tendency. We stop all of that excitement of being involved in the external world and we start caving in on ourselves. The mind just doesn't have a good basis. That's the sort of energy that laxity has a more specific meaning. It's referring to a lack of intensity or clarity to the mind when we are still holding the object. And that's where it's a little bit harder to discern and may not be happening as much for some of us because we're mostly dealing with the grosser forms of that type of energy that cause the mind to become very dull. The second one, that's excitement, is a subset of the larger category of distraction. Sometimes, even though we are able to bring the mind in a little bit, the mind still has a tendency to want to go out to all these objects. And any sort of distraction or mental wandering is the larger category. Excitement is when we're specifically directed towards objects of attachment. Right, we get quite excited. We sit on our cushion and suddenly we start thinking about, I've got that cake in the fridge. I bet that would be really nice to eat right now or something. Or we start thinking about some other very positive thing and we have a mind of excitement. It's much more tantalizing to think about those sorts of things than it is to focus on the breath, right? That's the tendency, is for this excitement to become a problem, and it can be in coarser and subtler forms, as can laxity. We'll talk about those shortly. But just remember, those two factors that are mentioned here, laxity and excitement, are subsets of the drawing in of the mind, the dullness, the heaviness, and the moving out of the mind, if you will, to all of these other objects of distraction. So this fault is not seeing when that happens. And that can happen, right? Like I was talking about earlier, where we sit down to meditate and we spent most of our meditation session elsewhere. We're not even focused on the breath for most of it. We're thinking about, oh, I've got to do that. And you start going into a whole thing of all the steps you need to do to finish that task. And then you go, oh my God, I'm supposed to be meditating. And then you come back to the breath. Those sorts of things that pull you away are meant to be identified and seen as quickly as possible, or we spend most of our meditation session distracted. And what good is that? Again, because we're doing the meditation to make our minds more focused. So we need introspection, the spy that sees what's going on, checking in quite frequently, especially at the beginning of meditation when you haven't developed the strength of mindfulness to stay with the object. You need to be constantly looking at it, just like a parent looking at their child when they're doing homework. Right, when they're beginning school, you might have to watch them quite frequently to make sure that they don't start spacing out and get out their, computers and their tablets and start playing games or do whatever. You want to make sure that they're doing the work. And that's the same thing with us. We need that sort of inner discipline, that element that helps to control things through introspection. Okay, so when we talk about these two factors of laxity and excitement, that again are a subset of the dullness and the mental wandering or distraction, these block the two main qualities of concentration. Mental clarity is hindered by laxity, right? Because we have this dullness to the mind to some degree that doesn't allow the mind to be really clearly focused on the object. Mental stability, meaning the ability to stay with the object, is impeded by excitement. Because as I mentioned, laxity, you're still kind of with the object generally, but you don't have the clarity, the strength of your meditation, the power of your meditation. That's where, again, laxity is a very refined subset of that dullness. What we deal with in terms of our dullness for most of us, I'm guessing, isn't really laxity. It's lethargy, fogginess, sleepiness even. But excitement, again, and other forms of distraction don't allow us to be stable. They don't allow us to stay with the object. Gross excitement is where your mind completely loses its object of concentration. So we know that one well, right? When we sit down and we do have like a zillion things going on, our mind's like a pinball machine. Subtle excitement is where you retain your focus on the object of concentration clearly, but a subtle part of the mind below the level of conceptual thought moves towards an attractive object. It's illustrated by the idea of water that is moving beneath a layer of ice. If you have a frozen river that is the bottom of the river is still, flowing, well, then that's what our mind is doing. It's kind of, we seem to be quite stable on the top, but we're getting subtly distracted to various objects of attraction. Gross laxity, The other factor is where you remain mindful of your meditation object, and its image is stable, but it's unclear. It lacks that clarity. Gross laxity is therefore quite different to sleepiness, whereby the object of concentration is totally lost in the fog of unconsciousness. So this again is something we may not even be seeing yet in our own practice, but it's when you are able to abide on the object to some degree, but it's just not so clear. You don't have the sharpness to the mind, if you will. And then can't get to the next slide. There we go. Subtle laxity is where you remain mindful of your meditation object and you have stability with clarity, but where the factor of clarity is not intense. So it might seem clear, but there isn't an intensity to the mind. The energy level is a bit diminished. Although your concentration is strong, your mind adheres to the object and the object is clear. It is as though that fine focus has failed. Subtle laxity arises because the mind has lost a little of its energy and so has relaxed the hold on the object. Through the factor of stability, the mind relaxes a little too much and becomes slack. Without subtle laxity, the mind adheres to its object but remains fresh, sharp, and energetic, intense, and retains the fine focus which gives intense clarity. And then I just want to point out, because again, for most of us, we're still not dealing with the even gross laxity, much less subtle laxity, but Geshe Loden does say that subtle laxity is the main obstacle to complete achievement of calm abiding. It's very difficult to recognize, leading some to think that they have attained calm abiding, when in fact they're merely strengthening the tendencies of ignorance, mental depression, and dullness by habituating subtle laxity. So he says again, it's not enough to simply know the characteristics of these, as we just went through, laxity, excitement, and some related mental factors. You must develop introspection, the primary antidote to laxity and excitement, so that you recognize the presence of these two obstacles and correct your meditation on the basis of that. Okay. Again, I think I can go by that. Let me, whoops, just do that slide. That would be nice to just talk about a little. Introspection or vigilance is once more the main method for cultivating shamatha, one of the main factors. It has two aspects. It introspectively examines the mind again and again, so it keeps, again and again looking at what's going on within our minds, and it vigilantly checks to see whether the mind is still placed on the chosen object of meditation. So that spy has that tendency to keep coming back to do that checking, and the checking itself is the more important part, again, of making sure that we're on the object. Okay, so that was the third fault, not identifying when these factors are arising, and how we identify their arisal is through introspection. Then we have to apply an antidote. If these things are in our minds, if we've got that that very lethargic feeling, or we have that distracted mind, whatever, we have to apply an antidote to that. Sometimes the antidote is as simple as, I need to just restore my focus on the breath or the object I'm meditating on. And sometimes that's strong enough to cause that excitement to just go away, or the dullness to be removed to some degree. Other times we need more dedicated antidotes. So I'm not going to have time to go through all this, but that's the fourth fault, is when we aren't applying the antidote. We're just letting that hang out for whatever reason. We don't want to address it. Maybe we're really enjoying that excitement, even though we see that it's not what we should be doing. We like being in la la land for a while. So when awareness identifies laxity or excitement, or any of these other factors, the dullness or the mental wandering, distraction, you should be quick to oppose them. The first line of attack when laxity is noticed is, rather than interrupting your concentration to apply specific opponents, simply tighten your concentration. If you tighten too much though, you might end up with excitement. So then you have to loosen if it's excitement. It's just kind of like, tuning a musical instrument, right? Where you might tighten it too much and then it becomes too tight, and then you have to loosen it a bit so that it comes looser, but you might go too loose and you have to tighten it again. That's how we continue to work with the mind in regard to these. Now, again, I'm going to skip over a number of slides because I don't really have time to go into all the detail that I'd hoped to have. But essentially, in the slides, you will see a number of more specific antidotes to those two elements, called there laxity and excitement, but it can refer to how we deal with anything that's kind of causing the mind to withdraw too much within or to get too distracted outside. And there are things like, again, first of all, try to just restore your attention to the breath. If you're dealing with laxity, dullness, heaviness, try to invigorate the mind so that it comes back up to that level where it needs to be. If you're dealing with excitement, try to bring the mind down, loosen the mind a bit so that you're not so tightly wound and what have you. So again, these are the sorts of things that are going to be talked about in those that you can, take a look at. Opposing laxity, opposing excitement. You can have fun with that after you get the file tomorrow. The fifth of the problems, faults that we have is when we over apply. This is not going to be a problem for most of us because this doesn't happen until you get around the eighth of the 9 mental abidings. And that's where you're applying an antidote when you don't need to. You're so used to applying the antidotes that you think there's something wrong with the mind, that it's not abiding on the object with strong mindfulness. But it actually is. And in that case, you need this mental factor that's called equanimity, which is where the mind is able to remain in a balanced state on the object that you're focusing on. It's actually a virtuous mental factor that allows you to stay present with that and not introduce anything else that doesn't need to be introduced, such as applying an antidote. Okay, so that brings me to the last topic, which once more, I'm not going to go into in any detail because we're at the end of our time together tonight. As I said, I've been teaching on that. I actually had 2 whole classes on that in exploring meditation that many of you attended. So you probably got more than your fair share of instruction on calm abiding. But it is important that we kind of look to that and we get inspired by that. We all can attain these meditative states. It just takes diligence, effort, putting in every day our time on the cushion. And so I encourage you to read up on that, spend some time. As I said, I'll include some slides in there that give some idea of what these various levels are like. But we go through a process of developing the mind, refining the mind, so that our concentration becomes even more effective. These faults all fall to the wayside, and eventually you are able to abide single-pointedly on an object for as long as you wish. Haven't quite achieved calm abiding until you've united it once more with that factor of pliancy we saw earlier, where suddenly there will be a whole shift in the way that your mind and your body feel, and you have a serviceability to them that wasn't there before, as well as a bliss that arises on the basis of that. That's when you know that you've achieved it. And essentially, when you've done that work with the bodhicitta motivation, you've achieved your surpassing practice of concentration. That is part of what the perfection of concentration, this 5th paramita, is all about. Next week, what we'll do is we'll talk about again how you introduce together with that the other side of the equation, the special insight into emptiness in particular, though obviously we also analyze many other teachings on the path. That's the perfection of wisdom as it's taught. Perfection of wisdom does also entail our awareness, our wisdom around other things. But the main element that the Buddha taught in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras is the wisdom of emptiness that has to be developed. So I hope I've kept this practical enough. I know when we get into this whole topic, it becomes a bit like, talking about things that seem so far away from where we're at right now in our own practice. That's not meant to discourage you, but rather to encourage you to continue to move in that direction, to see that we all have the potential to do that. So sorry, I've kind of used up all of our time, but I can maybe take 1 or possibly 2 questions. And if there are any questions on this, anyone? Probably have heard many of these teachings before. Mary Jo, you do have a question? Yes.
Yes, I have a question
Mhm.
about back to the posture of meditation and
Mhm.
the spine being very important. I
Mhm.
have a couple of friends that have quite a bit of scoliosis,
Mhm.
and I'm wondering, is it best? I don't have that problem, but
Mm.
is it best to imagine that your spine is straight?
I think the visualization, imagining that the spine is straight, might be helpful in terms of trying to, maintain that. But encourage people, certainly anyone who's got issues with their back, where their spine it doesn't have that uprightness, that proper alignment, to really just go to a place where they feel it's most aligned, not to force anything, certainly. That would be the other thing I'd want to make sure I say in regard to this. But I haven't actually ever heard any of my teachers answer that question. But I would
Mhm.
think that the visualization would be perfectly fine to do.
Mhm.
I know when I was doing Tai Chi Chuan, there was this idea of kind of like your head top being, everything being suspended from your head top as if it was just a straight rope that was
Mhm.
coming down from some sort of point that's up above you, or even a stack of nickels or something, coins that are
Mhm.
just all on top of each other. Any of these things that kind of make you feel again that you're in that place where there's just this very open alignment, which
Mhm.
even though they might not have physically, I think mentally it would be helpful to have that idea. I think it's a good
Thank
idea. Yeah.
thank you.
Rather than to be too focused on the misalignment that
Right.
would cause them
Yes.
to kind of
Yes.
feel out of whack or something.
It's
So,
very easy to focus on that, I think.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mary Jo. Yeah. Anyone else? A quick question? Okay. So again, my hope was that through going through this tonight and giving you a few little pointers on things that perhaps you've heard, but maybe it's always good to hear things again and to go back and do your meditation tomorrow. Maybe think about some of these points as you go through that and into the future, so that you, again, really relish your meditation practice. That's what I've been emphasizing in that exploring meditation module as well, is that people should hopefully feel a little bit more enervated to do the practice and a bit enthused about what the potential of their mind is to develop that degree of stability. And next week, we'll again go into the perfection of wisdom, see how we use that stability in the most powerful way. So, okay, good. Let's go ahead and do our final prayers. So the two dedication prayers that we generally do, we'll recite those now. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. And the prayers for our precious teachers. And as usual, I advise you to think about all the spiritual guides that exist in our world and other worlds, even, who are working for the welfare of others, whatever their spiritual tradition might be. As we recite the prayers for these three masters, think that we're also creating the causes for all those spiritual guides to have their wishes fulfilled, to have good health, to have long lives, so we and others can benefit from them. The wish granting, wish fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And then for Asahita, Lama Yeshe's reincarnation, Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors, for those wanderers in far off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us in intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. And lastly, as usual, think about those beings who you're holding in your heart right now. Whether you know them or not, their situation moves you, whether it be that they're experiencing hindrances, obstacles, whether they have illness, whether they're dying or perhaps have died. We think about those beings right now and we send this positive energy out to them. So it becomes a cause to immediately remove their suffering and bring them all the causes that will lead them to true peace and happiness. And may all beings have these same results through what we've done here tonight. Great. Thank you all so much for joining tonight. And I'm not looking forward to it being the last class, but I'm looking forward to certainly seeing you all again next Thursday. And yeah, we'll finish up this course. And hopefully, I have to tell you, I informed Eloise earlier that I was hoping perhaps to have more time in my schedule to teach on Thursdays again, while Geshe Sherab isn't able to. And it doesn't look like I'm going to be able to do that because of the pilots of Exploring Buddhism. I'll be teaching 3 times a week on exploring Buddhism, because it'll be Thursday nights for the East Coast centers, and then on Tuesday for you and all of the other mountain time zone, and then on Wednesdays for the Pacific time zone centers. So keeping busy with that program. But anyway, I'm sorry that that's getting in my way of being able to be with all of you on a more continual basis. But thank you all for inviting me, certainly, to do this series. And again, I'll look forward to seeing you all next week then. Thanks so much. Have a good week. And don't, yeah, hope you all stay safe in the snow. You're going to get a lot more snow up there, I think, than we are. I'm betting. I think Taos is going to get hit tonight. But anyway, be careful. Be well.
Thank you.